You're not sleeping?
Just a bit tired. You came home late.
It was just a long meeting. I'll make it up to you tomorrow, okay?
Yeah, good night, Ethan. When the faint blue light from the phone screen flickered in the dark bedroom in Seattle, I knew something was wrong. 3:17 a.m., a time when everything should have been still, and decent men should be lying next to their wives, not somewhere far away. A message from American Express popped up, a short, emotionless line. Transaction confirmed. 2 business class tickets to New York, departing this Friday. 2 tickets, not 1, not 3. 2, meaning a pair. And I wasn't the other half. I, Madison Blake, 41 years old, used to believe I couldn't be manipulated by cliché cheating stories. I used to think that if I loved enough, was kind enough, patient enough, everything would be fine. But real life isn't a Netflix movie, where people misunderstand and eventually find their way back to each other. This was real. This was my husband, the man who once swore he'd never hurt me, booking 2 tickets to New York with a woman who wasn't me, while I lay asleep under a dim bedside lamp, waiting for a message that never came. I sat up straight, cold sweat running down my back, the smart watch on my wrist still faintly glowing from an unset alarm. The room was suffocatingly quiet, only the light breeze brushing through the window and my heart pounding like an out-of-sync EDM track. I didn't need to double-check to know who was going with him. That woman, Brianna, his assistant with a sweet smile in the line, "You're so lucky to have such a wonderful husband like Ethan," which she'd just said 3 weeks ago when we had dinner together. Irony hits hard. I opened my email, eyes stinging but heart gradually turning cold. The booking details were crystal clear. Ethan Carter, Seat 2A, Brianna Wells, Seat 2B. A smooth flight with leather seats, wine, and the perfect distance to place a hand on a thigh without anyone noticing. Within seconds, my emotions flipped from shock to clarity mode, that fine line between being hurt and rising. I didn't scream. I didn't smash the phone. I didn't post a dramatic status. No tears fell in that moment. Instead, I grabbed a notebook, flipped to a blank page, and wrote the title, Survival Plan. You know, it's so easy for people to look at a heartbroken wife and judge. Maybe she's not attractive anymore. Maybe she neglected him. But the truth is, betrayal is not the fault of the betrayed. It's the choice of the betrayer. And for the first time in my life, I realized that forgiving immediately isn't noble. It's surrendering yourself. Ethan hadn't mentioned this trip last night when I asked if he wanted his favorite noodles for dinner. He didn't bring it up this morning either, when he kissed my forehead and said, "I'll be busy all day, don't call me." That line, "don't call me," now sounded more like a warning than a gentle reminder. I walked into the bathroom, turned on the light, and stared at myself in the mirror. I saw a woman with creases at the corners of her eyes, a few silver strands emerging post-lockdown, but in her gaze, there was a fire being rekindled. Not the fire of jealousy, but of determination. I wouldn't let myself be pulled into a game Ethan thought he was winning. I would reverse engineer everything. If they chose New York, I would choose myself. I set the phone on the kitchen counter and made a cup of black tea, the only thing strong enough to keep me awake without caffeine-induced panic. I sat at the table, opened my laptop, and reopened those accounting files I once thought were Ethan's job. After all, I had a degree in economics. I just gave it up to be a mom and wife. Sad, really. I used to be that capable, and now I was relearning from what I'd handed over to him. On the wall, the clock ticked to 4:12. I thought of my son, Aiden, 16, sleeping soundly down the hallway. I once wanted to keep a whole family for him, but keeping a dysfunctional shell is likely more toxic. If he knew his father wasn't just cheating, but manipulating, deceiving, and treating his mother as a backup plan, then he needed a stronger example, not a mother who bowed her head and endured. I opened a new email. Recipient, myself. Subject, evidence beginning. Attachment, a screenshot of the flight confirmation. Tomorrow, while Ethan still believes I'm the trusting wife, I will be the woman quietly rebuilding a new life. With data, with strategy, and with resolve. No warning, no confrontation. Because the best counterattack is when your opponent hasn't realized you've changed the game. I don't know when I became so skilled at hiding my emotions. Maybe it was from those times Ethan called to say he'd be working late, and I still packed his dinner neatly into a container and placed it in the fridge. Maybe it was from the parent-teacher meetings I attended alone, clutching my phone, hoping my husband, busy again, would call back. And now, as the night slowly faded through the kitchen window, I wondered, had I been training for the past 15 years to become an emotional spy, silent but sharp? After the discovery at 3:17 a.m., I didn't react impulsively. No rage, no confrontation. I chose control. It felt like standing at a chessboard where, for the first time, I was holding the power pieces. Ethan thought he was ghosting me inside our own marriage, but what he didn't realize was that I had already begun tracking, long before he even considered running. First was the iCloud account. Ethan had never changed the password I created for him 10 years ago. He thought I didn't notice he no longer left his phone on the table while showering, or that he stopped sharing his business travel calendar. I didn't confront, I observed, and data doesn't lie. I used a screen mirroring app I had installed the previous month, right when my intuition first hinted something was breaking. Every iMessage, every incoming and outgoing email, even Uber ride logs, were silently backed up to my personal computer. Not because I wanted to spy, but because I could no longer trust words alone. And like every investigation, the evidence eventually told the story. There were work-related emails from Brianna sent at 1 a.m., attached photos of them together at a conference Ethan had never mentioned, anonymous hotel receipts charged to the company card in cities Ethan never claimed to have visited. It took me 2 days to map out a timeline of deceit. Turns out for the past 17 months, Ethan had been living 2 lives, one with me and one with her. I used to think infidelity was a stumble, but it wasn't. It was an entire system, operating with precision. Ethan didn't just betray me through actions. He did it by constructing a flawless version of himself, the perfect husband, the devoted father. I saw the messages he sent Aiden, the good night wishes, the "a real man must live with responsibility" speeches, all while sending flirtatious texts to Brianna, drafting plans for their new life once everything settles. And the most chilling part, it wasn't the physical betrayal. It was the exit strategy. I discovered small transfers, $500, $1,200, then $5,000, from our shared business fund to an account under the name Ethan Carter Holdings, LLC. At first, labeled strategic investments, but gradually, my side of the balance became nothing more than a shell. Ethan had planned his exit, not just from our marriage, but from the company too, leaving me with tax burdens and the business expansion loan we'd recently taken. But I had changed too. The naive Madison was gone. I called Karen Briggs, my former financial advisor, the one who used to joke that I trusted my husband too much to insure myself. Karen didn't laugh this time. She stayed silent as I laid everything out, then said, "Madison, if what you're saying is true, this isn't just a divorce. This is financial fraud." I nodded, even though we were just on the phone. "I want to do this methodically, not just to get justice, but to take away life lessons that stick." Karen said, "Then start with the internal accountant. Who controls the reporting?" "I do." And that's when I began building Project Reclaim. I created a folder on my computer, Phoenix Folder. The name wasn't random. I was preparing to rise from the ashes of a love I once believed was forever. Inside were all transaction histories, bank statements, screenshots, financial reconciliations. I sent a backup to a private email account, an archive Ethan would never know about. I also scheduled a meeting with Emma Torres, a corporate and asset divorce attorney known for handling the high-profile separation of the Azura Group CEO. If I was going into this war, I needed a top strategist. The final night of that week, when Ethan came home with those tired-from-work eyes, I looked at him, but my heart no longer felt heavy. I was 3 steps ahead and still moving. "What do you want for dinner tonight?" I asked softly. "Anything's fine, as long as I'm eating it with you," he replied, kissing me on the cheek like nothing had changed. And yes, I would eat with him. I would board that flight to New York with him. But not for vacation. It would be to end everything. At the right time, in the right place, by the right laws. Ever since the call with Karen and the first meeting with attorney Emma Torres, I began living 2 lives. One side was Madison, the gentle wife, always ready to reheat her husband's coffee, smiling as she listened to Ethan talk about meetings that ran late into the night. The other side was Madison, the woman quietly and methodically planning to expose a traitor with logic, evidence, and the law. No one suspected a thing. Not a single soul. Not even Ethan, with the characteristic arrogance of a man used to being forgiven by women, realized he had walked straight into a game of chess where I was the one who opened. I started by changing my wardrobe, not to seduce him, but to prepare for a role. I bought a new sand-colored suit, elegant in cut but with bold lines. The 9-centimeter heels I had forgotten in their box for 2 years, now polished and placed by the door. I let my hair grow long in soft waves, redid my makeup with a deep crimson lipstick, the same shade Ethan once said was too strong for you. Now I wanted exactly that, strong, in every sense. The day Ethan said he had an urgent trip to New York to meet a strategic partner, I nodded, didn't ask more. "Who are you going with?" I asked lightly, as if only curious how many shirts he was packing. "Just me," Ethan answered, not blinking. That's when I knew. He had chosen to lie all the way through. That evening, after Ethan left the house with his gray suitcase wheeling softly down the steps, I poured a glass of white wine and FaceTimed Emma. "Tomorrow I'll be on that flight too. The ticket's booked. I'll be sitting right next to them." Emma raised an eyebrow. "On the plane? Madison, you know you're playing a dangerously high-stakes game, right?" I took a sip. "I'm not playing. I'm closing a deal, in the air, at 35,000 feet. And so the plan was complete. I had booked the exact row, 3C, seated between Ethan and Brianna. They would think they were beginning a romantic getaway, but in reality, they were walking into a courtroom without a bench, yet with everything: witnesses, evidence, legal counsel, and me, the seemingly blind wife, now the plaintiff. I printed all the documents that Emma and I had prepared together: financial reports, statements from secret accounts, copies of intimate emails sent from company emails, and a full set of screenshots from their conversations on Signal, the app Ethan thought was safe. I also brought a divorce agreement, a memorandum proposing the division of company shares, and even a resignation letter prepared in advance, with a space for his signature and a small fountain pen discreetly hidden in my handbag. But the most powerful weapon I brought wasn't the documents. It was composure. I wouldn't cry. I wouldn't throw a drink in his face. I wouldn't cause a scene in business class. I would do the one thing Ethan never thought I was smart enough to do: end him with logic and dignity. That morning, I arrived at the airport early, dressed in the sand-colored suit, rolling my suitcase like any professional on a business trip. When the check-in staff asked, "Business or leisure, ma'am?" I smiled. "Both. Today, I'm signing the most important contract of my life." Sitting in the lounge, I carefully opened my leather bag, checking every envelope. Documents? Check. Legal copies? Check. Recording pen? Active. I snapped a photo of myself and sent it to Emma with the message, "Ready for takeoff." Ethan and Brianna showed up at the gate a few minutes late, holding hands, laughing like leads in a cliché rom-com. I didn't look at them directly, just glanced over my sunglasses, committing every detail to memory like an emotional camera. By the time they reached business class, I was already seated at 3C. A glass of lemon water had been placed on the tray. I waited. And then Ethan saw me. In that moment, it wasn't me who was weak. It was him who panicked. His face turned ghostly pale, as if he'd seen a spirit. Brianna froze in place, her bag falling to the floor. I lifted my head and slowly removed my sunglasses. "Hello, Ethan," I said. "What a coincidence." The chess match had officially begun. When Ethan stood frozen in the narrow aisle of business class and Brianna's hands trembled as she picked up the designer bag that had just fallen, I knew I had made every move exactly right. Not because they were flustered, but because I was completely calm, and calmness terrifies a betrayer more than any scream ever could. "Hello, Ethan," I repeated, this time softer, like a polite reminder before a judge brings down the gavel. "Madison, what are you doing here?" "I think you know better than I do, Ethan," I replied, then turned to the girl who was desperately avoiding my gaze. "Hi, Brianna. Was the business trip going well?" She didn't answer, just lowered her head like a child caught sneaking cookies. The chief flight attendant's voice came steadily over the cabin speaker. Ladies and gentlemen, please fasten your seatbelts. We're preparing for takeoff. No more turning back. No more staged performances. Ethan reluctantly sat in seat 3B, right next to me. His cologne, the scent I used to find comforting, now struck me as ridiculous. Brianna sat by the window in 3A, both of them avoiding eye contact as if not looking would somehow make the guilt evaporate. Madison, Ethan whispered, his hand trembling slightly on the armrest. I know this looks bad. No, I cut him off. It doesn't look like anything. It is exactly what it is. I pulled from my bag a thick brown envelope, sealed carefully. Inside is the divorce petition, asset division proposal, and financial report on the illegal fund transfers from the company account. All you need to do is sign where marked. He looked at me in disbelief. You brought divorce papers on the plane? Not just that, I said, gently opening the underseat drawer and taking out a black fountain pen. This pen has a recording device. And oh, seat 6D is a notary I personally hired for this flight. Ethan started to react, but just then, the flight attendant appeared with a service tray. Champagne for the passengers? Perfect, I said with a smile. 3 glasses. By that point, Brianna had lost all color in her face. She turned to Ethan, whispering, the first words she'd spoken since boarding. What is she saying? You told me everything was legal? I looked her straight in the eye, not with anger, not with bitterness, but with the clarity of someone reading an open ledger. Brianna, he didn't just lie to me, he lied to you too. Ethan leaned forward, about to speak, but I placed my hand on the stack of documents. I'm not here to beg, I'm here to clean up. You have 2 options. Either sign this, quietly, privately, in a business class cabin with no media, or we take it to court, with the financial report already sent to the company board and the tax attorney. I held out my phone, showing him an email scheduled to be sent at exactly 12 p.m., right when the plane was due to land. Inside is a full backup of all data, from transactions to messages to photos, sent to the board of directors and regulatory authorities. I only need to tap cancel, but only if everything gets signed right here. Ethan looked over at me, those brown eyes that once felt like a safe place, now nothing more than hollow pits of overdue remorse. You're doing this for revenge? I shook my head. I'm doing this to reclaim what's mine. And so our son doesn't grow up thinking his mother stayed silent when she was betrayed. The cabin fell into silence. Only the hum of the engines outside and the heartbeat of a man on the brink of losing everything remained. Ethan bowed his head, hands slightly trembling as he flipped through each page of the documents. He paused at the final sheet, a letter of resignation from the company, citing personal reasons and internal issues. I've protected your reputation, Ethan. Don't make me change my mind. He signed. Stroke by stroke, line by line, in silence. Brianna looked at me, her voice weak. What are you going to do to me? I shrugged, gently swirling the wine in my glass. I don't need to do anything. You put yourself in this seat. When the notary stepped forward to verify the signature and apply the legal stamp, I felt like I had just removed an invisible rope that had been choking me for nearly 2 years. The plane continued to glide smoothly through the sky. But beneath the surface, a new era of my life had begun. Not with a fall, but with a rise rooted in self-command. When the plane landed at JFK Airport, I didn't rush to get out of my seat like the other passengers. I calmly gathered my documents, carefully placing the notarized copies back into my handbag, zipping it closed with a decisive motion. Ethan sat motionless, his eyes vacant, as if he hadn't realized that everything had truly ended, not with a fight, but with a verdict sealed without the sound of a gavel. Brianna had been silently crying since mid-flight. She no longer asked questions, no longer offered excuses, simply drowned in the heavy silence of someone who's just been exposed. I didn't feel angry at her anymore, honestly, because in the end, the one who destroys a home isn't the person who comes after, but the one who promised to protect it and still chose betrayal. Ethan walked out of the airport without saying a word, avoiding my gaze like a newly formed habit. I let them go ahead, because I no longer follow anyone. That afternoon, I arrived at the hotel I had booked for myself, not the one Ethan and Brianna had planned to stay in. My room didn't need roses on the pillow, nor a view of Central Park. All I needed was a door I could close and a space I could own. That evening, I video called attorney Emma. It's done, I said, my voice light, like I'd just wrapped up a partner meeting. You actually did it, Madison. Emma nodded. I rarely use this word with clients, but I'm proud of you. I smiled. For the first time in years, the smile didn't come with a sting. What's next? I asked. We've sent the notice to the company's oversight board. They'll have an emergency meeting this coming Monday. I don't think they'll keep Ethan, not after the evidence you provided. Good, I said. They used to trust him because of me. Now, at the very least, they should know I wasn't blind. 1 week later, Ethan officially stepped down from the board of directors. His shares were sold back at only half their market value because no one wanted to associate with a man suspected of internal fraud. The company we had built together didn't collapse, but Ethan's image in the eyes of shareholders did. I kept most of the assets, the house in Bellevue, 40% of the company shares, along with a clause granting me full authority to restructure the executive team. Not because I wanted to take over, but because I was the only one left with the capacity and conscience to save it from imploding. As for Brianna, she disappeared from the company after that day. Some rumors said she filed for unpaid leave. Others said Ethan cut all contact with her. I didn't care. I didn't need another victim to forgive. I just needed a new order, in business and in my own life. I moved into a small apartment near Lake Union, where I could watch the sunrise each morning without being interrupted by reminders of 7 a.m. meetings. Every evening after work, I drove myself through old streets, sometimes stopping to buy a bouquet of tulips, the kind of flower I used to love, but Ethan always thought was too plain. Aiden, my son, saw everything. I didn't hide it. I told him the full truth one night as we sat on the living room floor, eating pizza and listening to vinyl records. He cried, but not because Ethan betrayed me. He said, "Mom, I didn't know you were that strong." I hugged him gently. Neither did I, but sometimes it's the push from the person you trust most that makes you stand taller than ever. Life isn't happily ever after like in fairy tales. But now, every morning when I wake up, I no longer feel trapped in a role someone else wrote. I write my own schedule, attend meetings as an independent CEO, and I've opened a new branch, entirely under my name. Not to prove anything to Ethan, but to remind myself that I was never a supporting role in this story. I was always the main character, just never handed the pen. It's been 6 months since that fateful flight. 6 months since I sat in business class wearing a sand-colored suit and handed Ethan Carter an envelope that carried the weight of 15 years of marriage. Now I'm no longer the Madison who waited, who ate cold dinners and asked half-formed questions like, "Are you really on a business trip?" I'm no longer the Madison of revenge plans, the woman who carried a fountain pen with a hidden camera in her bag and calmly signed the papers that ended a shared life. Now I am Madison, the woman who chooses herself. Rebirth doesn't happen overnight. It isn't glamorous, doesn't come with a melodic soundtrack or glittering lights. It's a series of quiet but resolute days. It's when you open your closet and see the dress you wore on your last vacation with your husband, and you don't cry anymore. You simply take it out, fold it up, and donate it. Not because you want to forget, but because you've chosen not to hold on to things that once defined you through pain. I started over with the smallest things. Every morning, I make coffee for myself. Not Ethan's iced espresso, exactly at 7:30, but my own. I tried latte, cappuccino, even matcha. I learned how to make myself simple but beautiful breakfasts. Soft boiled eggs drizzled with sesame oil, toast with almond butter and banana. Some days I failed, burnt toast, spilled eggs, but those failures were mine alone. They no longer made me feel less worthy. Not anymore. I enrolled in a painting class every Saturday. Not because I wanted to become an artist, but because I wanted to discover something within me that no one else could control. On late afternoons, I biked around Green Lake, the wind in my hair, jazz playing through my earphones. Not because someone told me I should relax, but because I wanted to hear myself in a space that was just me and nature. And then, one day, I realized I wanted to turn my experience into something useful, not as a sensational headline, but as a foundation for other women standing at the edge between holding on and letting go. I started a support group called The Phoenix Table, a virtual roundtable for women who'd been betrayed, going through divorce, or recovering from the emotional shock of a toxic relationship. Every week we met over Zoom, not to cry, but to share solutions. I invited lawyers, financial experts, therapists, all women who had emerged from crisis themselves. The miracle is, when you help heal others, you also heal yourself. I saw that every time someone in the group shared that they'd finally dared to stand up, dared to open their own bank account, dared to say no to a relationship that drained them. One evening, while I was reviewing the content for our 20th meeting, Aiden walked into the living room. "Can I say something?" he asked, still carrying that 16-year-old awkwardness in his voice. "Of course." "I didn't know you were the kind of person who inspires others. I always thought you were just someone who took care of the family." I smiled, gently placing a hand on his shoulder. I used to only take care of the family. But then I realized, a strong mother isn't the one who carries everything. She's the one who knows how to get back up when pushed down. Aiden nodded. In his eyes, for the first time, I saw respect. Not because I was his mother, but because I was a person with value of her own. In the end, it wasn't money. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't the company or reputation that saved me. It was the choice to live truthfully. For myself. With myself. Rebirth isn't about returning to who you were. Rebirth is becoming a version of yourself that even the old you couldn't imagine. And I, Madison Blake, am living that version every single day. 1 year after I stepped off that fateful flight, I sat at a small roadside cafe in Charleston, a peaceful seaside city I chose as the destination for my first trip, meant solely for myself. On the table was a hazelnut milk latte, a moss green notebook, and a bouquet of wildflowers gifted by the cafe owner because "You look like the kind of woman who should get flowers every day." I smiled, not out of politeness, but because it was true. I used to think freedom was about not being tied to a man. But now I understand. True freedom is when you're no longer bound by the old fears inside your own heart. No longer afraid of being judged when saying, "I'm not okay." No longer afraid of being left behind for being too strong. No longer trying to please someone just to keep a place that no longer fits you. The Phoenix Table has now grown into a platform with over 200 members, with 2 regular meetings per week and a short podcast series called Don't Call Me a Victim. I invite women who once hit rock bottom to come forward and tell their stories, not of pain, but of the journey through it. A CEO who divorced her husband after he used the term sustainable growth to transfer all company shares to someone else. A teacher whose husband controlled her finances for 10 years. A single mother who left a toxic religious cult with her 3 small children. These stories don't need scripts. They're real. And because of that, they move people. We don't talk about female empowerment as a slogan. We talk about reality. How do you divide assets when your name isn't on the deed? How do you answer a child when they ask, "Where's Dad?" How do you not feel guilty when you're the one who chose to end it? Every thank you email sent to the shared inbox makes me feel like I'm turning pain into value. Not to brand myself as an influencer, but because I know what it feels like to be suffocated in your own life, and I don't want anyone to stay in that darkness another day. Aiden, now in his senior year of high school, once texted me during class, "Mom, my friend said you're like one of those women in the movies, the badass type. I think so too." I smiled through an entire meeting with the financial advisory group afterward. Not because of the compliment, but because I knew it came from a boy who had once seen his mother fall apart and now saw her rebuilding from the ashes. I no longer resent the name Ethan. He no longer exists in my life as a main character or a villain. He's just a closed chapter, a necessary one that helped me understand the worth of the ones that follow. Rumors about him occasionally make their way to me. He left this company, tried that startup, dated someone new but no longer seemed as respectable as before. I don't care, because caring is a form of connection. And I've withdrawn all emotional capital from that place. Once, during a podcast interview, the host asked me, "If you could go back, would you choose that kind of revenge again?" I didn't hesitate to answer. I don't call it revenge. I call it a smart response. Women don't need to break things to be noticed. We just need to know how to use pain as fuel, to go farther, not to burn everything down. That evening, I walked along the Charleston shoreline. The sand was soft. Waves lapped gently at my ankles. A little girl was learning to ride a bike across the street, her father running behind her cheering, "You can do it, don't be afraid to fall." I suddenly thought, if back then someone had stood behind me shouting that, I might have learned how to let go sooner. But that's okay. I'm here now, steady, free, and no longer needing a push to move forward. The sky turned a shade of pale honey. I opened my notebook and wrote one single line. There's nothing to return to. Everything is waiting ahead.